Welcome, everybody. Today, it is my great pleasure to host and moderate the very first Oxford Leading Sustainable Corporations Program alumni panel discussion. And today's topic is going to explore themes that are emerging around Earth Day 2021, which include concepts around exploring opportunities to achieve circularity, decarbonization, and a lot of other ways to improve nature-balanced approaches to a more thriving, healthy, resilient built environment. So joining me today are several of our Oxford LSC alumni, and I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, and I'll kick that off by introducing myself first. So my name is Fernando Arias. I am the National Director of Sustainability for Clark Construction Group. We are a US-based construction company with about $6 billion of annual revenue derived from mostly green building construction. We have over 498 projects that have been built or currently under construction under green building certifications. And all of that valued at about $52 billion US. So I come to this opportunity here at Clark as a long-time built environment professional. Initially, I got my start in the military fixing tanks and trucks, and I became very interested in solving urban challenges. So I became an architect, practiced architecture for many years, and then eventually scaled up my education and my understanding of sustainability and urban systems, ultimately arriving at Clark to lead the company's overall corporate sustainability goals. And that's eventually how I found my way into Oxford's Leading Sustainable Corporations program, to use the opportunity of the 2020 pandemic to improve my understanding of what the global perspective is on sustainable corporations. And with that, I'd like to pass it off to my other fantastic panelists. And first, I'll start with Matilda.
Hey, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending where you are. I'm Mathilde Breuil. I'm working for Loast, which is a lime company. And I completely embrace the formation on Oxford. I'm a new business developer, and I'm in charge of sustainable initiative as well, especially for developing business or for just taking initiative as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Matilda.
Thank you.
Alexandra Ewing.
Hi, good afternoon. I am the Managing Director of Net Greenworks, which is an environmental and climate consulting company. My background is I have a PhD in environmental management and sustainability. My experience with the built environment relates to a period of time where I managed building operations for 100 buildings scattered around Nashville, Davidson County, and my experience as Sustainability Associate Director for Vanderbilt University.
That sounds great, Alexandra. Thank you. David, please.
Hello. Yes, I'm an independent business consultant specializing in working with SMEs here in the UK, helping them to come to grips with sustainability. And the challenge that we have there is that because they're small, that their impact might be quite minor, but collectively SMEs represent over half the turnover of the private sector UK income at the moment. But my background in built environment starts with my first degree in civil engineering, and rather than going into what I call engineering proper, I actually started managing ready-mix concrete plants and quarrying, particularly marine dredged aggregates. So that's my background, and I'm particularly sort of working with SME construction companies at the moment.
Thank you, David. I appreciate hearing that. And last but certainly not least, Maria.
Okay, hello everyone. I work for quite long in finance for nearly more than 25 years. Work mainly for multinational businesses. start my career from Coca-Cola company, work for Mars and work for RB, now recently renamed of Reckitt company. And most of my career was lying in finance area, and I work in finance all my life, but have quite wide experience being a business partner from finance to the business and work very close with the business. My academic background, I finished university and got degree in finance and corporate finance and accounting. I got my PhD in segmental reporting, which is linked directly to sustainability questions today as well. And definitely one of the topics we will discuss today will be related to that part, and definitely for reporting side, where I do believe I can add some comments and values in our discussions.
Thank you so much, Maria. So, as you can see, we've assembled a really robust and diverse panel where we are seeking to present points of view from both the challenges and service provider opportunity, as well as the solution providers and the folks that are able to truly scale some of the strategies that might be discussed in today's conversation. So to keep things very interesting and dynamic, we do recognize that the Oxford Leading Sustainable Corporations program has a diverse global alumni footprint and is represented by a variety of industries. And so today, I thought it would be great for all of you in the audience to try to understand how we are perceiving the challenges and the opportunities through the lens of just challenges and benefits or opportunities. And so I'm going to put out a first question to all the speakers, which will help to inform everybody who's watching today how everybody appreciates the concept of challenges. And so my first question is going to be for each of the speakers at their own turn, where please answer the following question. What is the greatest challenge you think we need to address to circularity, decarbonizing the supply chain, all of the challenges that we kind of addressed at the beginning of built environment discussion? Greatest challenge. Let's start with Matilda, please.
Well, as a raw material company, supplier, I think there is several challenges. The first one we have in decarbonization, for example, the CO2 emission, as we are providing the raw material which can be burned or unburned. In the case of burning, you have different scope of CO2 coming from the fuel, of course, and coming from our raw material, which is a stone. So coming from the fuel, we can have several solutions. We can maybe go through later. But our greatest challenge here is what is coming from our own raw product, because we cannot stop at the moment to supply because of this. So this is how to rethink the capture of our CO2 and what we can do to avoid this emission. Now in circular economy, our challenge, because it's our lifetime product, you have the raw material, you supply the raw material, your customer use it, and sometimes you have a waste which comes from our raw material, but it's created by the customer. And this waste, what should we do about it? And I think about removal of pollutant and incineration. Most of the time is go to landfill. So how we can, as the first supplier, maybe take it back and do something else with this, like filler for construction, for example. How to make it less harmful, to be able to be reused. And so our greatest challenge, I would say, first our CO2 emission, and second, how we can listen to the customer, understand what do they have at the end as a life cycle of our own product, and which solution we can provide to them.
Right. So just to summarize some of what I heard that I thought was key is you and your company as a material provider, both for construction and other industries, one of the greatest challenges that you're observing is quantifying, tracking, measuring, and reducing actual CO2 emissions. So it's a logistical challenge and an operations challenge. as much as you look toward pivoting to the consumer market and to industry market and understand how some of your products are better targeted to those sectors as well. So it's a question of internal corporate supply and demand relative to carbon and carbon management.
Exactly.
Those are things that I heard, and I thought that they were very interesting. So let's continue, and over to you, Alexandra.
Thank you, Fernando.
Yeah. So over to you, Alexandra, with the same question. What is the greatest challenge you think we need to address toward, decarbonizing the supply chain, making the built environment more equitable, more nature-based and focused, circularity, those themes?
I think one of the biggest challenges relates to behavior and expectations and entrenched attitudes. So if you look at that, you can see that our current way of doing things, our current economy, is built on the expectations and the learning and the knowledge that's been built up over decades and sometimes longer. In reaching our aspirations for sustainability and for decarbonization, we have to make a leap of imagination. And right now, what I see is that there are some leaps of imagination happening, but it's not uniform. I think that we need to figure out ways to connect innovation and those leaps of imagination with people's current expectations, knowledge, and behavior surrounding what they understand. We need to make knowledge and information more free-flowing so that people have access to the latest information and they understand how to harness that to reach the decarbonization goals and the aspirations that we're setting out as a collective human species.
Thank you, Alexandra. I think that's a very succinct way of also commenting on the value proposition behind the Oxford program, which is really to not only provide executive level training and development and knowledge sharing around how to bridge the gap between innovation and transforming corporate governance, earning social license to operate in concepts that really bear on the ability to accomplish some of these reductions in carbon. So I think that you framed that also quite well. Pivoting to David, same thing to you, question to ask you, David. So, what are the greatest challenges that you observe in this, theme of discussion today?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to what Alexandra's just picked up, that it is challenging what we've always accepted. And I remember my final year project supervisor when I was doing my civil engineering degree. So we're talking a few decades ago now. And he said to me, and I can't remember the context of the conversation or why he said it, but he said, future generations will think us mad for burning fossil fuels. And I can remember thinking at the time, what on earth is this guy on? What's he thinking about? But I realise now that probably in another decade or two, people will be thinking that. We'll be driving our electric cars, hydrogen and such like. So what I think the biggest challenge, talking as a civil engineer, is that we normally used to using concrete and steel and asphalt to construct with, but they are amongst the major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions through their manufacture, and so we've got to start looking for new ways to build. And it's not just a case of offsetting carbon, but also we've got to realise that it's that we are extracting non-renewable natural resources, and we can't carry on doing that and say that it's sustainable, because there is a school of thought that's saying yes, the extraction either by mining or quarrying is fine as long as you're doing it in a way that isn't harming people or the planet. But is that really a sustainable future with a finite resource? So it's going to challenge the materials that we use in the built environment, and also how we construct our buildings. That we need to make them so that they're more easily reused or repurposed, or if they do need to be demolished, that done in a way where we can reuse the elements of the building. And that because there is a lot of embedded carbon in structures, which we need to address. I'm gonna say it's not going to be something we'll do immediately, but it's got to be our long-term sustainable aim.
I agree, David, and I know that you and I have had very robust conversations around the tensions that exist between, as an example here, if we want to draw down our extraction and combustion of fossil fuels, how else we can derive the benefits of those fossil fuels as an offset to not just process energy and power to energize equipment and buildings, but really the other minerals that are produced as a result of dealing with petroleum-based products. So where else are we going to come up with all of the chemicals that are necessary for plastics and health care, et cetera? Because there's so many inputs that receive the benefits of processing petroleum and other fossil fuels. So I think that there's a lot more to discuss there, but I really appreciated some of the ways that you brought up key terms like embodied carbon, embedded carbon, and ways in which we can also start to account for that, which I think in the past 2 years, it's only the beginning of that discussion. Never before have I really heard the concept of embodied carbon, and I think that it's a great thing to include today. So with that, Maria, same question to you. When you think about challenges and ways in which your perspective is informed through, especially through the finance and corporate governance aspect of your work, now what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that you observe here?
Okay, thank you very much, Fernanda. And here I would agree absolutely with David, Alexandra, and Matilda that that's become more and more critical from day-to-day life and with the growth of the business, particularly when we in finance concentrated on top and bottom line. For us, more and more important is to understand what is inside of our financial reporting and how we make the data standardized across industries, across different organizations and companies, and also how to show the content of the data available not only for insiders but also for external stakeholders and for investors. Because today, when we read our financial statements, we have classical understanding, but quite often we are not easy to get information where we in terms of sustainability and what organization really doing. Formally, yes, we can report, we reduce waste of materials, we increase usage of our materials, we increase our turnover, which gives us incredible impact. But then how formally we can compare companies, how we can compare financial results in terms of sustainability, and how we can make it standardized across the board for all organizations, which is not easy because each industry, depending where we are from consumer to natural resource one, have different positions and different rules. And in that case, of course, we need to set up sort of simple rules which could be easy to understand, easy to absorb, and then easy to compare. That's become more and more critical for us, and of course it is related to time, because we don't have much time now and we need to think what will be the next, because it's not like years to prepare or change IFRS standards, which we want to do. And in that instance, I guess that's the big challenge.
Great, Maria. I think I heard some really fascinating points of view as well regarding financial reporting. And my own interpretation of what you said deals also with how financial statements might need to be reviewed and evolved to include things like, CO2 performance, perhaps. I know that ESG reporting metrics and frameworks are very important for corporate sustainability, but then are the corporate 10K reports sufficiently capturing ESG reporting as well so that investors are able to evaluate the health of a company's performance, not only because of its kilowatt hour reductions or its ways in which it's controlling its externalities or impacts on communities and on the environment, but really also to take a look at this from a performance perspective on CO2. So I felt that was really great.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to take the reverse order because, Maria, I don't always want you to be last. I would like for you to be first this time. So we just went through a round of exploring all the challenges, but I also felt like it was, all of us wanting to come up with a solution, right? Because we're not just people who point out problems. All of us are experts now as a result of the Oxford program, and we're able to articulate points of view. So now this round of questions is all about what do you think, from your point of view, is the greatest benefit or the greatest opportunity from decarbonizing the supply chain, working with more nature balanced approaches to the built environment, and any interpretation of that theme. So overall, what's the greatest benefit or the greatest opportunity? And why don't we start with you again, Maria?
Okay, thank you very much. Overall, in terms of the supply chain part and decarbonization area, definitely most of multinationals companies trying to find the new ways to think differently, also to introduce new approaches and innovation to their strategies. But overall, still, some basics can be old and new from another aspect. What I mean, we have to think how we simplify the stuff from one side, but from another also, if we talk about supply chain, how we make it more easier and accessible, not only for businesses, but also for external organization who can view independently and see what our, let's say, company structure works today. Because we are quite often keep our standards and keep companies closed, being still very public, but some information has to become more and more open and transparent for society. And in that instance, of course, we have to sort of not only from reporting side be open, but from observation, because now regulation and the standards, even in health environment, also for companies who is more taking care of people health, they become more open and controllable by public organization and governments. But still, in that instance, we can open it, let's say, for supply area as well, because the standards of producing, the standards of waste should be also observed and viewed in instance of society. And in that case, of course, company will be if you're more open, of course, they will become easier to share also experience from another aspect. Because if you get, let's say, one company open their borders and using one experience, the other one can use that experience easily and share it, and then make it, let's say, exposed, and of course definitely that will be important for us, and that's what I think we have to become different here.
I think it's interesting, Maria, that you coming from the finance sort of perspective on the discussion, that you see open, transparent, accountable reporting as an opportunity, because I think that private sector typically privatizes, or keeps, from a competitive perspective, some of that data proprietary, and so I think what you're suggesting here is that as more accommodation of open and transparent observations and ultimately regulations will only help to normalize and make more standard the approaches, so that the scale of the economy can really embrace some of this low carbon strategy. So I really appreciate that point of view. David, over to you. Same question. What do you think are maybe the best benefits or the biggest opportunity here in this space?
Well, as well as coming from a civil engineering background, I've also been involved in infrastructure asset management, where the whole purpose there is, or principle is, to consider life cycles of assets. From sort of cradle to grave. That's a very common phrase that's used. But I know I've sort of painted concrete as being the real big bad boy, but if it's used well, it can contribute to its thermal mass properties, and the process of carbonation, which happens as concrete matures, which sequestrates carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So if it's used well in a building, it can actually reduce or even totally eliminate the need for heating and ventilating equipment. Now, the electromechanical engineers are not going to like me for saying that, but it means that we don't need to extract metals and everything from the planet. So we're saving that. We're saving operation costs. In terms of input energy to run the heating and ventilating, and the whole atmosphere of the building. We hear about sick buildings, because the atmosphere that's created within them is not good for people to work in. But with concrete, it can be used, and there are buildings out there which demonstrate that this is possible. So yeah, it's I think the benefit is I suppose to realise that things might get a bit topsy-turvy, and you sort of think, oh, hang on, this isn't right. We're emitting carbon in this and using natural resources, but we're balancing that out by not needing to extract and produce carbon for other processes. So I think building owners and certainly commissioning agents, that if they broaden their horizons a bit and their time scales as well, because buildings and structures, they're usually around for a long time, 60, 100 years, if not more. So yeah, it's I think open our eyes, and lengthen our timelines, and the benefits will be there. Real, tangible economic benefits.
Yeah, I always appreciate, David, how you are able to articulate a very complex network of stakeholders. And I want to parse that out just a little bit. And I think what I heard is, maybe under the theme of performance of materials, the durability of materials, and whether it's concrete, masonry, or any other inert material, as we think about the life cycle of the way that these, structures are built, can we seek to improve the overall carbon profile of some of these materials in a way that may balance out or reduce total life cycle carbon loading for an asset, And you factored on top of that health and wellness, which, I was just on another discussion group, and we were talking very much about the sometimes conflicting or competing strategies and requirements between healthier buildings, especially in a post-COVID world where everyone is attracted to high indoor air quality. Balancing that out from not only a process energy perspective, meaning running ventilation very high, but also can we take advantage of some of the more passive systems that may be available regionally to provide some of these healthier indoor environments at the same time that we're balancing that out with shocks and impacts and spikes that might be as a result of natural phenomenon, which might exist. So it's a lot of very complex, loaded topic, but I really appreciate how you started it. I'm not going to give away my point of view until the very end, but I'll come back to some of the things that you brought up. So Alexandra, over to you. Same question, greatest benefit
Okay.
or opportunity?
I completely agree, first of all, with Maria's point about greater transparency. I think particularly when many companies are trying to build and launch their strategies around decarbonization, building a culture of transparency and information sharing and data sharing is critical to pushing the needle on all of these issues. In terms of decarbonization, I agree completely with everything that David said. I think that having an explicit focus on decarbonization allows for that leap of innovation in the built environment. So when I was working at in Metro, Nashville, and Davidson County, when we had a new building project, the sustainability message tended to sometimes get lost in the process of adhering to city budgets, of having the project be sustainable in an economic way. And so the process of value engineering tended to X out some of the key sustainability measures that could lead to decarbonization. So if we as society are focusing more on decarbonization in an explicit and allowable way, saying this is a priority, we are going to do this, then the huge benefit from that is pushing that innovation and pushing that behavior change and pushing attitudes to shift so that we look more at the embodied carbon of a building, as David said. We look at the life cycle of building materials, and we are pushed to innovate in the materials we use, and perhaps actually in some senses we go back towards more ancient times when they actually built buildings that had the ability to stay cooler or warmer, or a more solid ambient temperature that was less fluctuating just based on the materials that were used. I think, some of the other obvious benefits of decarbonization are helping the smaller businesses along your supply chain to meet their carbon goals when otherwise they might not have the opportunity to do so. The other thing that occurred to me is that when you are focusing on decarbonization, particularly if your supply chain, you're building up your resilience by not being vulnerable to the vicissitudes of the fossil fuel market, which will only increase, I think, as climate-induced weather events increase in severity and longevity and sheer number. We are going to have those disruptions of markets. In Nashville, about, oh gosh, someone will correct me on this, I'm sure, when they view this video, but maybe 8 years ago, we had a really severe hurricane that disrupted fuel supply chains from the Gulf. And Nashville receives much of its fuel supply from that region. And so until those plants that were processing fuel got back up, we had a little mini oil shock, and gas prices skyrocketed. Lines were snaking around the block just to get fuel for your car. My point is that when you reduce your dependence on fossil fuels, you're less vulnerable to those types of shocks. Obviously, there are also monetary benefits. And I think that that's not emphasized enough. There's this myth that sustainability and green building is too expensive. Well, I think in some sense, we've built our expectations up to expect those prices to be higher, and we've created a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you expect prices to be higher for green or more sustainable materials, and therefore the market responds to that and says, aha, we can charge 4% more for this more sustainable version, or this material that has a lower embodied carbon footprint. So I think that decarbonizing and pushing these concepts of lowering embodied carbon in buildings, lowering your carbon footprint, can produce monetary benefits for companies by reducing costs associated with energy use.
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra. I think, again, you also presented a very diverse and interconnected network of challenges. And some of the key things that I took away from some of your starting comments here is that in order for us to really achieve this like leap of innovation, it also means changing minds and behaviors. And you were referencing a lot of your consulting engagements with public entities, right? So the city of Nashville and other folks that are on the public sector side. But I also think that some of these concepts translate to private sector as well. You know, as we think about the way that corporations compete for businesses and establish competitive advantage around their supply chains by capping what might be some of the variable costs around fuels, for instance. I felt like there was a lot of connected pieces to what you brought up. And one additional piece that I wanted to, oh, and you had talked about the hurricane. You might be referring to the 2005 Katrina hurricane, which really kind of took out a variety of refineries and distribution networks in the Gulf of Mexico, which might have made it especially challenging to those neighboring communities. Or maybe it wasn't Katrina.
Definitely Katrina did have that impact, but there was even a more recent hurricane that also did that. So I guess, you know, as
kinds of weather
yes,
disasters.
so as climate-induced weather events increase, we're going to see more of this, and we need to accept that this is going to be a reality, and focus not only on reducing and decarbonizing, but also on adaptation measures. And those two are interlinked, aren't they? So when you decarbonize and you reduce your reliance on fossil fuels, you're also planning for adaptation. You're also adapting to the current realities. And the sooner we accept the current realities that won't just go away because we say net zero by 2050, the better things will go, the more economically prepared we'll be, and the more successful we'll be in meeting these goals.
Yeah, and I think as a final comment before I pivot over to Matilda, I also like that you brought up small business, because certainly that's something that here at Clark we're discussing quite a bit, which is really ensuring that there is equitable distribution of benefits and opportunities across different sized companies, because it's always the small businesses that eventually grow into competitive companies. And so we want to be always thinking about different scales of businesses and how do we help to expand the knowledge base and the services that they provide with an eye on reducing total carbon, as well as scaling up, you know, supply chains and resiliency, both on energy and material goods. So Matilda, pivoting to you, wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to hear your thoughts as well around what you think are some of the biggest opportunities or benefits to address some of these challenges.
Yeah, thanks, Fernando. So first, the greatest benefits is for human being, yeah? Because we cannot continue to to emit like this and have an impact on our planet. So that for sure is something we have all to consider. Now I am based in Belgium. So we are under EU goals for 2050, which is to reach neutrality in carbon in all EU. I still think that carbon, I will not say issue, but emission is something we have to think globally and not on a region, but well, it's dependent on the EU. And then EU creates a surrounding and a context, especially with carbon taxonomy, which the myths that Alexandra mentioned of sustainability is expensive, well, to compare with the tax which is increasing with your carbon emission, maybe the myths fall apart. And I want to say something about what David said on natural capital resources. As a raw material supplier, we are using this raw capital, this natural capital, excuse me, plus the taxonomy, plus the context of awareness of the society. In this context, there is an opportunity and not a threat to rethink how we should work and to make the greatest company. I think it's the moment to reinvent our business. Should we take the transformational step, or should we keep finger crossed by, or maybe the taxonomy will decrease over the year, which will never happen? And I think we have to reshape, and it will take time because most of the time raw material supply are quite conservative and we don't know what to do differently because this is the way we work for 200 years, for example. So this is a big challenge, but I think instead of taking it as a threat, is the opportunity to take it as opportunity for circular economy, rethink how we can change our core business, maybe more in services, developing more waste treatment, still by continuing our business, but with the time have a backup at least to make the society continue to live and to bring something to our communities and bring something to the society where we live. We are not alone in our own company, in our country. Huh? And for this, I think Maria brings a very strong argument of partnership and transparency, because I think we are not the only one to emit CO2. We are not the only ones which are having waste. We are not the only one who's struggling with taxonomy. And I think sharing our concern with maybe similar companies or even a customer or supplier and trying to find solutions together will be much more effective than to trying to do it on our own. So yeah, that's
Okay.
it.
Yeah. So,
but a lot of arguments have been said already by my colleagues, but I think it was very interesting their point of view, and I think all of them need to be considered.
Yes, I agree, and I think that you also framed some key important aspects of this, which is, what's the function of partnership in the space of corporate sustainability? When we layer on top of that some of the regulations that are emerging globally around a carbon tax or some other type of penalty, if you will, cost of doing business, if you will, related to carbon emissions. And I know that now I'll segue into sharing my point of view as well on these issues. And of course, all of you are my trusted colleagues and alumni in this group. And I think that we've had various conversations to help us understand how to frame this discussion, because there's a lot of different stakeholders and multiple timelines that are moving forward when we factor in built environment and opportunities to improve the way that we build our buildings and communities. So I had started mentioning as well that I am at a construction company, so I'd like to offer some points of view about how this is currently happening. I've been in my role for almost 4 years now, and I hope to stay here for a long time. I get excited about the job that I have because it's the first real application of concepts. I'm finally in a role that enables me to understand the translation between policy, between corporate imperatives and the execution of those objectives and what it takes to get it done. So from the challenges perspective, I think maybe there's two that I'd like to highlight for our discussion. And the first one is a lack of consistent standards, regulations, incentives, right? So as we look at the United States as an example, just a year ago, very different environment that we were operating in with, air quotes, business-friendly regulations, which meant no regulations, which meant a lot of impacts and externalities and damages and risks to all kinds of stakeholders, natural resources, human people, etc. So the lack of like a uniform policy environment that creates the sufficient standards, codes, and regulations that form the floor of the performance dynamic for private sector is a giant challenge. Opportunities are about how do we leverage what is normally a corporate approach to doing business, which is differentiation, competitive advantage, intellectual property. How do these concepts that are true to overall business able to embrace and adopt new ways of defining those outcomes, but from a more balanced perspective, factoring in environmental, social and governance, performance issues. Yeah. So when I think about the opportunities, I want to also comment on one particular project that will help us to put this into the ground in a more concrete way, or in a more practical way. So, because David is my engineer, so I'm going to have to put on my architect hat for a little bit and discuss this. So, if you search the internet, you might be able to see that Clark Construction Group is the general contractor to build the Amazon headquarters in the East Coast, what we sometimes colloquially call HQ2, Headquarters 2, but it's part of the new neighborhood here in the capital region called National Land. Our client has asked us, Amazon has asked us to take a look at reducing carbon impacts across everything. But mind you, this is one of the top companies in the world, right? When we're talking about, Fortune 100 companies that have the means and wherewithal to really scale up these kinds of impact programs, regardless of policy and regardless of market-based approaches. And so for the first time in my career, I mean, the last year and a half, I've been deeply in the neck to figure out what does low carbon concrete look like? And how do we procure that? And who installs that? And so I could continue to tell you more about low carbon concrete, but what is important for this discussion, I believe, is nobody really understands all of the hidden little costs that come with the skills and the knowledge in order to be able to deliver this thing. And when we think about low carbon concrete, I mean, in case folks aren't familiar, for those that are in industries outside of built environment, let me take a second to explain. The concrete is a material. Yes, the Romans are famous for using it. But there's 4 pieces or 4 ingredients, if you will, to concrete. There is sand or silica, which unfortunately cannot come from the desert. It only comes from riverbeds because of the profile of the grain or the granule of sand. Second, water. Third, and that water can come from a variety of places, but it would be optimum to reduce it from fresh water sources. Second, aggregate. Aggregate is a term for like little rocks, little boulders, little elements in there that make up kind of like the chunky granola mix of concrete, if you will. And concrete comes in a variety of finishes and of compositions so that you can have a very nice, polished, non-porous concrete, maybe the way that you see in Japanese architecture particularly, or you can have a very coarse concrete, perhaps what you would see in roads. And then the third piece, to glue it all together, is cement. Now, cement, Matilda very well knows, is produced by boiling and melting limestone to produce lime that then becomes cement. And that fourth ingredient is the area where, in construction especially, industry is innovating extensively now to try to reduce the need for high volumes of cement, which is a non-renewable resource because it is extracted from limestone, which has to be quarried and it has to be melted. You can see all of the ways in which the carbon loads towards something else. And so 3 things are currently on the table to offset the production of cement. The first is slag, which is a byproduct of metal ore smelting plants. If you're melting steel or a variety of metals and you're producing a lot of waste products with that, turns out that waste product can go into cement and act as a bonding agent. Secondly, with coal-powered plants, we're talking about fly ash. And fly ash is another ingredient that substitutes the need for a bonding agent like cement. But as we know across the world, there are various regulations now underway to decommission and essentially shut down coal-powered plants. So now we're seeing a decline in that ingredient. And the third way that we're seeing improvements in the innovation for cement is CO2 injection. And I know that David likes the word sequestration or sequestering or capturing CO2. And so in this area, we're talking about companies that are currently capturing CO2 emissions from various heavy industries, are harnessing the gas and liquefying it to deliver it to job sites and to concrete batch plants so that they can liquid inject CO2 into the mixture for concrete and therefore reduce the need to produce lime, cement, all of that. So you can see that it's still a very early stages innovation space, but how will people know how to scale these opportunities, and how will people understand the ways in which they have to be prepared to demonstrate that some of these carbon substitutions and cement substitutions are working to reduce overall impacts on the environment? And that has a lot to do with testing and third-party verifications and certifications. And suddenly now you start to see that there's a whole cottage industry of different specialists, scientists, as well as labor, like people who literally are pouring some of these materials in place. Just such a range of different professionals needed to get to a point where we're saying, oh yeah, new construction has a lower embodied carbon threshold than conventional construction, right? And it kind of comes back to the point that Alexandra made as well, which is this perception that green buildings can cost more. And anyone who has the curiosity can check this out, but we certainly would love to discuss it further, which is, turns out that research shows that for a particular building or an asset, could be a campus, the majority of the costs are actually incurred over the life cycle of the asset in the operations, maintenance, and facilitation of any improvements and equipment upgrades over time. 13% or so of the costs are captured under first costs, which include design services, construction, commissioning, etc. But then the rest is all about how you operate the assets. And so I'd like to sort of wrap up my remarks to say that, you know, there are currently some innovations happening with concrete as a lower embodied carbon product, but there's a variable out there that's unknown, which is really understanding the human quotient in all of these innovations, and how we need to help people understand what they should be doing and how to rally this from a competitive advantage position for corporate and private sector companies, not just expecting government and regulations. So I hopefully gave not only Clark's point of view and my own point of view, but tried to touch on the different perspectives that the speakers provided to you all today. And so with that, I think since we provided a variety of challenges and opportunities, I'd like to just now, you know, propagate the discussion where we can move into learning, you know, more about how greenhouse gas emissions and embedded carbon can be sustainably managed in the circular economy. So this is open-ended, and I invite, you know, anyone who has an initial thought to get started. How can GHG emissions and embedded carbon be sustainably managed in a circular economy? What do you think?
Well, if I can jump in here, that I think you made a good point there, Fernando, about the organisations that commission buildings and are needing to use materials which haven't, gone the full test of time. That it does need a certain amount of courage to do that, and certainly if you're investing a lot of money in a structure, you need to know that, or be reasonably comfortable that that building's going to survive and it's not going to start crumbling when you start using it. It's got to be truly sustainable. It's got to live. But I think that as we go through this sort of transition period, where we're moving to a fully decarbonised way of life, that there will be stages, and that we need to think through the full solutions, because I think finding sustainable solutions is not straightforward. It involves what they call system thinking. There's lots of impacts and regulations that are happening, and so I think we're in a stage where we need to find the best solution, which will necessarily require us to go for the lesser evil, if I may say so. So there will be some carbon emission. There will be use of non-renewable natural resources, but it's been minimized. And going back to my asset management experience, we talk about continual improvement, that we've got to try things and say, right, okay, we'll do it this way because this is the best that we can at the moment. But as new technology and science and practice comes in, we can review that and say, oh, hang on, we could tweak this a little bit, we can do this, we can do that, and we can improve the carbon footprint of that particular cycle.
I agree completely.
Yes, sorry, yes, go on.
No, continue, please.
Well, I was going to say that, yes, I'm saying concrete is an issue, but also, timber is used in construction as well, and of course that is renewable if it's managed properly. And I believe that we've got structures that are up to 14 stories high, so it's not just your two-story domestic dwelling. It can be for bigger buildings that we can use timber and new ways of using that, and so there is a brave new world out there which is going to need challenging the status quo and requiring a bit of courage to experiment.
I think those last two things that you pointed out, David, were critical. Courage and challenging the status quo. I think I keep coming back to changing mindsets and behavior, because I think that we have evolved into a modern society that's built on a convenience culture. We are wedded to this idea of building quick and getting quick results from things that we want and getting quick satisfaction. But if we could just change our mindset to one of stewardship, where we're reusing materials, where we're finding new ways to design buildings that can incorporate the old along with some of the new. So when I was at Vanderbilt, we did an embodied carbon study of a project we did with a historic building, and the choice to keep the building, I think for Vanderbilt, was an easy one. It's a beautiful old building, and they wanted to retain that beautiful architecture for the neighborhood, so it was a community feature as well. The interesting thing is, when we did the embodied carbon study, we wanted to just do a proof of concept to say, when we look at existing building stock, particularly historic building stock, is there a way that we can lower the embodied carbon of the life of that building and have the old architecture and reused materials rather than just building new, rather than having that mindset of let's have everything be brand new. And as it turned out, the result of the study was that a renovated building, over the life cycle of that building, including the first costs, as Fernando pointed out, and the operational costs, in terms of carbon, there is a much lower embodied carbon footprint for that building than if you built a new LEED certified building. And I think that that is an important message. I think we need to start celebrating the old and the reuse of materials, and that there's some honor in that. There's courage in that too, in finding innovative and interesting ways to incorporate the old into design.
Yeah, and I want to just jump in on what Alexandra was commenting there briefly and say that, it's easy, I would say, or rather it's easy to appreciate the choice to preserve historic building stock. Because David, you were talking about buildings that last 100 years or more. Let me tell you, there's very few of those in the United States. I'm sure there's very many more of those in the United Kingdom. But I think, again, I'm always attracted to this, kind of paradox between, performance and, design, for example, right? So if we have historic buildings, they're typically going to be much more thermal muscular, if you will, thicker buildings, that are able to retain heat and cool temperatures indoors, but they maybe don't offer the types of indoor amenities that the current workforce does, or even on the residential side, perhaps. And what I have seen, and one of the reasons actually I got really attracted to sustainability as an architect that I never commented on is just I encountered it with adaptive reuse. That's what it used to be called. And adaptive reuse in New York City when I was architecting referred to the practice of taking Beaux-Art buildings or buildings that were historically designated, gutting the interiors out, delivering them as core and shell projects with refurbished exteriors and brand new lobbies and enhanced circulation elevators, etc., all the mechanical equipment. But now these buildings were going to be converted from original uses to new use. So I think what Alexandra's commenting on here is there needs to be a balance between improving, upgrading, and retaining existing buildings and upgrading and refurbishing existing buildings to modern standards. And I think a big piece of the motivation or incentive to propagate that concept should come from policy, so that in the development community, they understand that there's going to be either an expedited package for them to get to construction and occupancy quicker, or a tax incentive that will help them to offset the costs of including some of the preservation technologies that will help to keep the buildings as they are. And then ultimately, this is a planning mechanism, because neighborhoods that incorporate historic fabric also are higher land values and attract a more diverse set of users, which helps to scale down and propagate small business and mid-sized buildings to occupy in those neighborhoods as well, which really is a way of getting at this full circular economy, which is not just a question of, cradle to cradle or cradle to gate, as sometimes it's called, David. But, I feel as though we want to factor in the jobs and the economic opportunities of the people who are going to be delivering on some of these goals of lower embodied carbon buildings and projects, at the same time that they're able to benefit from this economically, so that they have higher quality of life themselves. So I wanted to make sure I commented on that. But I see Maria also wanting to comment, so please, Maria.
Thank you, Fernanda. And in that instance, from finance side, I absolutely agree with Alexandra, David, and Matilda. Definitely, we have three aspects to consider. One of them, cost, as you already mentioned, and of course, when we reuse the buildings, we will save definitely, because the base and the walls, they stay the same. And then the second aspect, which is important, are depreciation rules, which we have to reconsider, revisit, and rediscuss from my first point of view, how we think about it, what we have to do, and we are not expensive twice, because when you rebuild it or build the new building, basically, your new building will cost you more instead of the old one, which was already expensed at a certain period of time. And materials which you will use on top of the existing, yes, they have to be expensed, but they are much more low in terms of the cost versus absolutely branded new building. And the third aspect, which is critical important, if we make in our business decision, how we think and what we do in terms of our return on investment, ROI part. So this is very key and important, as we need to think practically what are and how we compare those things. Like, are we doing new building, or we decide to renovate the existing one? And that will be important, particularly for climate and for all our environment, and then for companies. And then we can offer for some companies who are searching to do new, absolutely branded new factories or new buildings, and propose something absolutely different in terms of innovation, and use existing buildings in different and with the new lives. That will be important.
Yeah, I like what you said there, Maria, particularly the very exciting use of some of these keywords like depreciation, right? Certainly a massive corporate driver for establishing cost horizons and how to recover costs from construction. Matilda, I wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to share your final thoughts as we come to the
Yeah, but a lot of stuff have been said, and I fully agree with this. But I think, yeah, it's an opportunity for innovation as well, because CO2, waste, ashes, all what we generate are still compound. And instead of looking after new material, new technology, new compound, looking at the other side, okay, this is what we generate and what we have, and we don't know what to do with this. We store it, we burn it, we have it, and we do not know what to do with it. How we can develop new things coming from it, not maybe on the same application, but on a different application, on a different treatment. Of course, it will have development or treatment because it's a waste, so you have probably mercury or a dirty compound which is not compatible with human life. But thinking more as a material or compound we can reuse and we can rethink and reshape, I think this is the future of innovation, and not only develop new things to consume again. And one topic you raised with the aggregate, that with the ashes on incineration, you can generate gypsum. Okay, this gypsum is considered as a waste by the regulation because it's a side product or waste from an industry, which is burning waste. But in reality, it's quite pure, or it can be pure. And consider it as the waste because the regulation say the waste, and because, in Belgium, you had the regulation saying, okay, using a waste in a blend with a pure material is still considered as a waste. I mean, you should start from here as well, from the regulation and from the way you think innovation, because in the people mindset, and I think it's what Alexandra wants to say, okay, if you say to someone, oh, I sell you a waste, it's not very good business, So it's just reshaping everything, and I think there is a high potential for innovation, high potential for circular economy, and for improving regulation as well. What is really harmful for the human being and we should forbid it, and what is just because it's a waste because we don't know what to do with it.
Right. To something really strong there, Matilda, which is really at the end of the day, the future of innovation in this space of circular economy and of built environment issues. One of those horizons in the future is really to rethink the waste products from other processes and how currently we're using waste products from industrial processes for certain ends, but how we might want to scale that up more broadly. And I think that is something that can be catalyzed through a lot of research and development initiatives, whether corporatively or at the academic and government sector, and certainly through partnerships, because public-private partnerships are a key mechanism to ensure that there are translations of research and policies toward execution and adoption by the market. So I know that we didn't really intend to solve every problem today, but we wanted to showcase how all of these points of views from the alumni group are informed by not only the education that we receive, but really what we're doing practically in industry today. And what we want to do is use this as the first of hopefully many more series so that we can continue to explore what is the translation between our skill sets, what we've learned, and what we're applying with that knowledge towards the future. And so I want to take a moment to just thank everyone, all of the panelists from today, and seek to continue the conversation further. So without more ado, I'd like to sign off and say thank you so much, and I look forward to the questions and discussion that we'll have after this video.